Thank you to everyone that's joined us. We're just going to give it a few minutes to have others join before we get started. Thank you everyone for joining. We're just going to give it one more minute before we get started. Okay, we want to allow the most time for this conversation, so I think we'll get started. I want to welcome everyone to this afternoon's program. This afternoon, if you're on the West Coast, or morning or evening, wherever you may be. My name is Lauren Forking. I'm the director of the Never Again Coalition, and I want to welcome everyone to today's program, which is the second in this month's series, Rising Up for Human Dignity, Resisting Cultural Erasure. Joining us in hosting this series are quite a number of partners, including the Oregon Historical Society, Oregon Jewish Museum and Center for Holocaust Education, Portland State University's Holocaust and Genocide Studies Project, WorldOregon, the Immigrant Story, Japanese American Museum of Oregon, Portland Chinatown Museum, Five Oaks Museum, Native Arts and Cultures Foundation, Kol Shalom Community for Humanistic Judaism, Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, U.S. Campaign for Burma, Never Again Coalition, and with the support of Rabbi Posen. This year, for Genocide Awareness and Prevention Month, we wanted to look at an aspect of genocide that isn't always discussed. Often when people think of genocide, they think of the killing of a group of people, but there are other ways to attempt to erase a community. One of those ways is through the destruction of a community's culture. The purpose of this series is to examine attempts at cultural erasure and the ways that communities have resisted and continue to resist these attempts. As we think about the number of attempts of cultural erasure throughout history, we know that we must start by acknowledging that we are guests on the stolen land we stand on. We pay respect and honor the work of Indigenous nations, leaders and families, and their knowledge, creativity, resilience, and resistance in the face of attempted erasure. We also acknowledge the systemic policies of genocide, relocation, and assimilation that continue to impact Indigenous communities today, and know that fighting against these policies and unacceptable behaviors requires occupiers of this land, including ourselves, to listen and amplify Indigenous voices while acknowledging our complicity in the harm these histories cause. We hope that this series will spark conversations and further learning that will lead to informed action, and that will play a role in fostering a culture of respect, truth, and accountability in our communities, one that encourages cultures to not just survive, but to thrive. So for today's conversation, we are talking about Rohingya stories of hope. As many of you have heard, the Rohingya of Burma have been called the most persecuted community on the globe. For decades, the Burmese military has sustained a genocidal campaign aimed at erasing the Rohingya through any means possible, including the stripping of rights, education, worship, livelihood, citizenship, and more. In the face of this relentless campaign, the Rohingya within Burma and throughout the world have persevered. And as we'll hear about today, Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh are doing incredible work to restore culture despite the obstacles and struggles the community faces. We're very excited to have three people with us today who bring extensive experience on this subject. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce the three of them and get the conversation started. Yasmin Ullah is a Rohingya social justice activist born in northern Rakhine state of Myanmar. She fled to Thailand at a young age with her family and remained a refugee in Thailand until 2011. She currently serves as a board member of ASEAN Steering Committee of the Bridges MM Project, which helps train and connect young people across Myanmar. She has worked on various projects, including the anthology, I Am a Rohingya, where she published her poetry along with other Rohingya poets from around the world. In 2021, she was named on the Feminist 100. Max Frieder is the executive director and co-founder of the international community-based public arts organization, Artolution. He's a graduate of the Rhode Island School of Design and received his master's in community arts from Columbia University. Max is a transdisciplinary artist, sculptor, puppeteer, teacher, and facilitates collaborative mural programs that address critical local issues with children, youth, and families. His projects have taken him to over 26 countries, including planting the seeds for the first ongoing public arts program for Rohingya artists in Kutupalong refugee camp in Bangladesh on the border with Myanmar. And moderating today's conversation is Rohingya Begum, a London-based artist, consultant, and activist. Rahima is the co-founder of international human rights organization and grassroots movement, Restless Beings, dedicated to supporting the world's most marginalized communities since 2007. Her activism has always placed human dignity and agency right at the front and center of her work. She's also the co-founder of Route 25, London Coffee House, arts and community space, and micro bookshop, where everything you eat, drink, and buy goes right back to charity. Yasmin, Max, and Rahima, welcome. And really, I have to say, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lauren, for the warm welcome. And thank you to everyone who's joined on. Hello, Yasmin and Max. I must apologize to everyone today. I had some sound issues, so I've had to join on with my mobile phone, but you know, we find a way. I'd really like to begin this conversation, a very timely and relevant conversation, with something that I know is really important to the both of you. So we all know when it comes to persecuted communities, they don't always get a seat at the table to be able to express their agency and what they see fit as the right way to express their trauma. And we also, you know, find that is ultimately the most important thing. And then at the same time, I know that both of you are really passionate about finding ways in which we can actually place dignity at the front and center by ensuring that communities are supported in finding their agency and expressing their agency. So I'd really love to hear a little bit more about this from the both of you and the way that you think that the Rohingya community are doing this right now and what your hopes are for opportunities for the Rohingya community and other communities to be able to continue to do this and find this agency. Should we begin with Yasmin?
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Rahima. It's such a wonderful event. I would say it's one of a kind because we don't come across a lot of these conversations very often. Usually it's the conversation around, oh, what can we do? How can we fix problems? And we don't really come back a little bit, or we don't take it further when it comes to issues like genocide or mass atrocity. Before I begin, I would like to actually acknowledge that I'm speaking to you all on an unceded traditional territory of the Katsi, Semiahmoo, Kwantlen, and other Coast Salish people. And unceded means that the lands were never actually given up or surrendered. And thus I am currently operating, working, learning, living my life on a stolen land. With that somber, realization, I think when it comes to Rohingya issues, and you put it so eloquently, Rahima, it's incredibly important to actually acknowledge that the survival of the Rohingya community has not come about because there was so much aid or so much international support. It's actually the community themselves that have sustained survivability and sustained the community's cohesion in a sense. And women have so much to contribute to this. They're often seen, doing the invisible work, which is, already a contested issues in the global community, but specifically for the Rohingya community, it's not just women taking care of children, making sure the houses are clean or making sure that everyone has food on the table. It's not just that. Women have actually always been the glue of the community. And as genocide and mass atrocity hit, they have shifted their roles in so many different ways. And very specifically, one way that I have heard over and over again was during the time that 2017, the mass campaign against Rohingya, the genocidal campaign that was carried out in full force. Women were the ones that put down everything that they were feelings and put down everything that they were struggling with at the time, and ensured that everyone in their family were able to cross the river and seek safety properly. It was them that carried all their 4, 5, 6 children all across the river and got to safety in Bangladesh right now. It was the reason why those children survived. It was the reason why so many elderly people actually survived. It was the women's work. And it's just such a missed opportunity that we don't talk about this more. We don't center the community more, in a sense that they were the ones who actually crossed the river. They were the ones who got together, built the raft, the bamboo rafts, or whatever makeshift rafts that they could, at the time that it was such a heightened risk for them to be shot down by the military. Apart from that, apart from just surviving, they were the ones who've always been sending money home. And this is just a personal example of my parents. While they were in Thailand, because we were there for a very long time without protected status, with lots of security issues that we were facing, my parents were always sending money home to actually sustain their siblings, sustain their families, extended families, for example. And this is a common recurrence in a lot of Rohingya family. It is not just us, it's unspoken almost at this point, where the Rohingya community send money home, sustain people in Rakhine State through all these limited conditions. That's why people are continuously being able to survive. On top of that, in the refugee camps, even though there is a clampdown on livelihood and on education at this point, which is just so tragic, instead of using that as a leverage for us to actually uplift these people and help them rely on themselves, because eventually the funds that are coming from the international community will dry up, and we will not be able to help these people. Eventually it will become an even bigger tragedy. So this all goes back to how the community not only sustain people in Rakhine State, they also are responsible for all these informal learning centers that we just barely talk about, and international funds don't trickle down far enough to them. But they have been able to stretch the dollars so thin, they get like $200 and they run with it. It's so sad that I just feel awful when I hear so much stories on the ground that they just wish that they have a little bit more, just a tiny bit more. They're not wishing for anything ambitious. They just want to be able to stretch the dollar so far that it encompasses the entire community. And I don't think that that's the mandate that is set out for a lot of INGOs. Unfortunately, like, our community knows that if we don't do it, no one else will. But it's this competing interest and competing almost clashing plans or goals that there is on the ground. And I hope that as we go on having these conversations, there would be a changes of heart, that people will actually spend more time learning on how Rohingya community have been able to sustain themselves for this long, and how much more they would need in order to actually just uplift themselves enough so they can become self-reliant eventually and will no longer require aid. Thank you. You're on mute, Rahima.
I'm really glad, thank you. I'm really glad that you began the conversation with speaking about Rohingya women. Because I run an organization that essentially works with so many of these women and sees them day in, day out, fighting their corner tooth and nail. In 2017 with the influx, it predominantly the women carrying both the bags of clothes that they could just bring back with them, plus the child, and trying to get to the shores, and then immediately thinking about, where can I find shelter for my family? What is the first bit of food I'm going to provide for my children? No care in the world for themselves. And I think we see that resilience continue on now when you meet any woman in the Rohingya camps and any young girl actually who is fighting every day as well. And I'm so glad you mentioned that. I think that agency, that female agency within this entire discussion of the Rohingya community is so important. And then I'm also really glad, and it's interesting that you also mentioned the donor fatigue, and we see it now, you know, throughout the last couple of years especially. There is almost a donor fatigue, but also a lack of interest in wanting to sustain the work of supporting a community that has been for so long sort of marginalized in so many different ways. Thank you, Yasmin. I'd really like to hear, Max, what you think about, you know, centering the community and supporting that community's agency, and how we can work towards bringing a community to the table in the right way. And I know you do a lot of that through the creative work that you do at Artolution.
Thank you so much, Rahima and Yasmin. Your words were just incredibly poignantly and articulately put, and I'm just deeply honored to be in this conversation with you. And Lauren, thank you so much for hosting this. I just think this is an essential and really crucial conversation right now. And I would also like to acknowledge I'm on Lenape land currently in New York City, that is of the indigenous community. And so one of the questions that you asked, I think it's just so important, is about agency. And before I say anything, I would say I'm here representing our team of Rohingya refugee artists, and that really, this is all about them. This is about Anwara and Dildar and Muhammad Noor and Muhammad Amin, and about all of our team. This is about them much more than me, and that I view myself only to be as a catalyst to try to convey some of the messages that they really are the true sages to be learning from. And so to give a little bit of background to answer that excellent question about agency, is that, you know, what we do is really founded on being able to work with a team of local artists all over the world. Actually, we have teams in 5 different regions and 5 different continents, working in Uganda with the South Sudanese community, with the Syrian refugees, in Jordan, as well as in Lebanon, as well as with the Colombia community, with IDPs and with folks coming from Venezuela. But we're going to focus on our team in the Rohingya camps. And, you know, what's been so incredible is that the resilience, both that they've shown, but that they've been able to kind of reclaim this incredible cultural identity that in many ways they weren't allowed to explore when they were in Myanmar. And you know, one of the things of the stories that we've heard, and it's been so, and I think Yasmin hit the nail on the head, is that the female artists that we've worked with, these incredibly strong women, have been some of the most inspiring and strong and innovative minds in the work that we're doing. And I think maybe the best thing that I can say as far as that agency is maybe relaying a specific story. And so I would love to talk about one of our specific women, who, her name is Dildar Begum. And Dildar is a remarkable human. And I had the chance to meet her when I was working in the Kutupalong and Balukali camps. And to share the story, it's almost exactly the story that you just told, which is one of the reasons it almost sent shivers down my spine hearing the way you described it, Yasmin, is that, you know, her story is that she had, she was living in Rakhine State. She was living outside of Butidong in Mongdao. And one of the stories was that, you know, when the military Hutsa came, they burnt down her village, and they attacked and murdered some of her family members, and she had her husband who was tortured and then captured, and went through very serious, very acute trauma of things that I know in my life I could never imagine. And when she fled, it was exactly what you said, Yasmin. She had her 2 special needs brothers, her mother and her grandmother, and she was the one who was leading them all, right? She was the one who would dig the holes in the ground during the daytime and cover themselves in dirt and stones and the way she described it, with leaves. And then during the nighttime they would run. And when they ran, they got to the Naf River, and exactly as you said, Yasmin, she was the one who led how to be able to weave a raft to be able to get across with the reeds of bamboo. And when she got across the river with her family, she was looking for a place to live, and she ended up finding a very small hut that was able to be constructed in Lambashia. And when she was there, she actually had what we call shock-based mutism. She didn't speak for over 9 months because of the experiences that she had and not being able to be in contact with her husband and with her family. And And she came in and ended up working in a program that we had started. So we started a program initially. I was there right in 2017 when the influx was happening. And initially I said, okay, we need to find artists. Like, artists need to be the beacons of truth. Like, there are artists in every community in the entire world. We need to find artists who are able to work with the children and the communities there. And I was looking initially, I was there with an independent actor and worked with a couple of different organizations. And I was looking, people said there are no artists because artists would get killed in Myanmar. And I said, well, that's not possible. There are artists in every single culture in the entire world. And people said there are no artists. So I literally started knocking on every single door that I could possibly find. And what I was asking for was artists. And what I really should have been asking for were craftspeople or seamstresses or people. There's such a rich tradition of cultural and the arts in the Rohingya community, but they never necessarily called it art. That doesn't mean it wasn't art, but they didn't call it art. And I was looking for artists. And eventually we found Muhammad Noor and Muhammad Hassan. And they said, we're not really sure if we're artists, but we always loved making art. And Muhammad Noor specifically said, you know, I used to make art. My mother said I was not allowed to make art because she was afraid that the government would find me and that I could be killed for this. So he actually found little pieces of charcoal from the fire and would make drawings on scraps of trash and bury them in the ground so that nobody could find it. And through these two artists, we ended up being able to find another two men. And I said, okay, we need to find female artists. Like, we need an equal number of female and male artists. And they said, well, there are no female artists. I said, I don't believe that. Look and you will find. And after 3 months of looking, they found our first four female artists: Hasina, Rishmi, Rifa, and Anwara. And what was amazing was that then they started working in different communities, and we were able to set up different programs of doing large-scale mural programs that are all interactive, where all the stories of the community come together to be able to tell their stories in the public sphere. And this is when Dildar comes in. So we were doing a program in one of the women-friendly spaces, working with women who've survived violence, who've been survivors of different types of sexual abuse. And she was there and was silent, right? And then she started painting with us, and she spoke for the first time when she was painting with us. And the first words that she said were that I have not felt that I've been alive for the last 9 months. This is the first time that I'm feeling that I'm alive. And my greatest responsibility is to take others who've been through the same silence that I've been through, and for them to be able to tell their stories, for children and for teenagers and for families and women to express what they've been through. And this is my greatest responsibility in my life. And now, ever since that day, she has been working with us. And now she's actually our lead artist. She's leading our programs. And Dildar is one of the most inspiring women who's been able to now speak in front of as many people as we can possibly put to be able to listen to her. And really, I'm here on behalf of Dildar. It's not about me. It's about her and about Muhammad Noor and Muhammad Hassan and Anwara and Rifa and Hasina. And for them, what's been remarkable is this idea of taking their stories and putting them out into the world, putting them on their walls. And so we started with just 4 small murals, and now it's grown to over 200 different murals that we've done, to a program that now has over 30 Rohingya refugee artists, as well as Bangladeshi artists that they're working with collaboratively, which is really important. And so to answer your question, if you imagine that all as a preface, Rahima, I think agency can come in many different forms. And the reality is that agency needs to be defined by the community that is defining what agency means to them. It's a cycle. And I think because of that, when you start to see the remarkable stories they put on the walls, it's something that's been truly eye-opening, I think, for them as much as for us. Yeah. And I say them as far as not just the Rohingya community, but also the Bangladeshi community, and being able to see, wow, these people have so much talent. There's such a rich culture of traditions and so much beautiful, so many different types of beautiful ways of expressing themselves. And I was lucky enough, and I view myself to be very privileged to have been able to get my doctorate, to do my doctoral research specifically on the Rohingya culture and the Rohingya community, where I was able to go 5 times to Bangladesh and do 5 different sets of training for our teams, and being able to collect hundreds of pages of interviews and focus groups. And one of the things I learned the most was that it is as important for the artists that we're working with as for the children that they are working with. I think many times we think, okay, having children have the opportunity to take a paintbrush and paint for the first time in their life, that's so important, especially because of the acute trauma that they've been through. But what we're realizing, and what I really realized, is actually the artists that are facilitating that are just as important, if not even more important. And for them to have the opportunity to share that experience with their children and with their communities has been so influential, because then they're the ones who are speaking to their imams. They're the ones who are able to go back to their family members and say, this is why it really matters for us to have creativity and our culture and really being able to express what matters the most to us. And I will say that it's changed my life more than anything I've ever experienced, has been able to work with the Rohingya community, with some of the most inspiring people in the world. And I hope the next time that we do this conversation, we can bring some of our team from the camp to be able to come in on the conversation. I think that would be a huge goal and aspiration for us as well. And so because of that, I don't want to take up too much time, but I couldn't agree more. And I think the Rohingya women that I've gotten a chance to get to know and to meet have deeply changed my lives and have such brilliant wisdom. It's truly an honor to be with both of you. So I can pass it back over to you, Rahima. Sorry, you're muted. Yeah, you might just have to unmute.
I need to stop doing this. Thank you so much, Max. I'm just listening to you, and I want to nod even harder because I cannot relate enough to some of the things that you were saying, and it's so refreshing to see someone so passionate but also very informed as well. And I think that's really, really important. And the reason why I say this is because I think, especially from the work that I, within this field, I work across the world with marginalized communities, and predominant focuses on the Rohingya community. And one of the things, and Yasmin and I have often spoken about this, is that there is this assumption when we see a community struggling that community is and was and will always be this struggle. And that's it. We place that community in a frame of struggle, of trauma. And we forget somewhere along the line that community came from a place where they had jobs, where they had lives, where they have creativity, where they had a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a love or a favorite film and a favorite book and a poem that they wrote and flowers that they enjoyed cultivating every Sunday morning. And we forget. And then and the music that they listen to, and I think through that there's this kind of assumption that we make, and with it, and I guess this kind of goes into this ideological idea of poverty porn and saviorism, but we exoticize the struggling, and as a result we are uninformed of who the human beings are behind this struggle. And I think this is why these kind of conversations and the work that you both do, and everything that you just mentioned now, Max, about ensuring that agency comes from creativity, comes from allowing for the stories to be shared and the creativity to come from the community themselves, and everything that you mentioned, Yasmin, earlier about who that community is and how they say those stories. It's, I'm so excited to be and honored to be here as part of this conversation. And Max, there's something that you mentioned about Dildar, one of the artists, and another woman that you mentioned that spoke 9 months. Forgive me, was that Dildar who spoke 9 months? Yeah. So there was a young girl that I met a few years ago in the camp. So we worked very closely with her, very much like your story. I mean, we met her, she didn't say anything. Day 3, we met her again. And then she showed us a lantern that she'd made with crisp packets and small plastic packets from sort of aid food pack boxes. And she kept on making these lanterns and mobiles. By day 6, she decided to speak to us about these lanterns. So it required for us to understand that this 7-year-old girl makes mobile lanterns and little hanging patterns and things like that she hangs inside her little temporary shelter inside the camps in Bangladesh. And we started to speak about this. And then I said, look, I want to see how you make them. So she showed me. And then she had so much to say. I couldn't stop her from talking. She had so much to share about everything, what she does every day, how many lanterns she makes, how no one really cares, but she loves it. She fills her entire house with these sort of crisp packet flowers that she makes and lanterns that she makes, because it reminds her of her garden when she was back in the village. And so she's recreated it, and it's resilience through a different form. She's not given up. She's recreated her garden inside this 2 meter by 2 meter tiny plastic camp shelter inside, the middle of nowhere in Bangladesh, inside this 1 million plus refugee camp. She has created her little garden. And so, we always refer back to her as our Eden girl, it's her Eden, she's continued it. And that's a kind of resilience that is magic. And it's the resilience that beyond donation fatigue beyond our interest and anyone else's interest in a community. That is the community carrying their spirit and their hope forward through creativity. And so I think, you know, for you to have a program like Artolution inside the camps and in other parts of the world, as you mentioned, is vital, Max. It's exactly where we should be heading. And it's exactly what places dignity at the front and center of the work that we all are a part of. And talking of stories, Yasmin, congratulations. You're working on a children's book right now. I'd really love to hear a little bit more and about what you think about writing as a way to preserve, as a way to strengthen a community's culture. Please tell us a little bit more.
Absolutely. I think I have really nothing to say. It's been such a great honor to join this conversation. It's a privilege of my own to just be able to explore these few different things that the community have been able to create, do, or just, you know, encourage each other to go forward in order to uplift the community. And one of the ways that I tried to attempt, you know, basically to process my own trauma in a way, or my own yearning for home, or my own, you know, basically trying to rationalize some of the experience that we have, family separation, you know, land laws, all of this stuff. I tried doing it through poetry, and I never really thought one day I would actually get anyone to be interested in it, for it to be published. But then eventually we, you know, through enough partners and people who are really interested in helping Rohingya in this sense, to uplift us morally and through literature, where we're able to actually get so many more poetry done, and that was through the camps, which I think when it comes to, you know, solidifying and consolidating groups of people who are separated in so many different parts of the world, art is one way to actually do that. And a very, very important way to do that. I've been so happy to be able to read some of these poems, and a lot of them really remind me of what we take pride in. Often, as you said, you know, a lot of the narratives around Rohingya is just about struggling, suffering, and often Rohingya ourselves have had to basically explore and navigate this world that just isn't, you know, interested in us talking about anything else apart from our struggle. And therefore we kind of morphed ourselves into fitting this narrative, this very, very limited label of refugees, of limited sense of resilience, that, oh yeah, you survived, amazing, that's it. That's all that we want to hear from you. But in truth, we have had long traditions of so much, you know, weaving culture, of embroidery, of so many like different textiles, of fishing, farming. And if you're not smart enough to farm, you won't actually see results or be able to harvest your own, you know, your own hard work. So all of these are cultivation that of skills that have taken so long of a time to perfect, but then it's undermined, it's diminished when we don't talk about them in a more holistic light. And so I wanted to share with you the covers of the books, and I'll share with you the website that you can go on, and in the near future you'll be able to actually pre-order them, but at this point not yet. But you can actually save the link for the publishing company. We worked with Asia Foundation and Guba Books, and they've actually kindly leave it to us to actually explore this artistic freedom. And we were able to create 4 stories. So these 2 stories are from Rohingya artists, Rohingya authors. One on the right, Hafsa and the Magical Ring, is mine, and one on the left, The White Elephant, is by my colleague Mayu Ali, who's also a poet. Both of us have had a really great honor to work with Guba's books, and basically crafted these stories. One about my story. It's very specifically, you can see a little bit of the weaving of mats and, containers. This is a very huge part of Rohingya community in terms of our traditions. This weaving culture actually happens every 3 months because, a lot of these natural materials actually disintegrate. And so it becomes not just a thing where families do for themselves and, screw pine as a natural resource, as sort of like weed that exists everywhere in abundance in Rakhine State, but it's the family gathering, but it brings the entire neighborhood together. People sit, talk, eat, drink. Children listen to their grandmothers and elderly people talk and share stories and share, very specifically something called kissa, which is like a very specific, unique folklore that exists within our community. And they pass on the wisdom within those kissa, within those stories, onto the younger generations. And these younger generations, they may not be able to, because they're so young, they may not be able to weave right away, but they're sitting there with their entire neighbors coming to help them, and they are having fun running around. From the materials, and they're made into toys, rings, watches. So that was my attempt to basically connect back to my own roots as well, because initially I didn't know about this or have the knowledge or understand this to this extent, that this was actually a communal thing. And one thing that I really want to emphasize, and if you take nothing from whatever we're talking about and my hope for you to understand, is one thing I would love for you to take away is that Rohingya community is a collectivist society. We are very much about uplifting each other, and it's not about individual survival. That is important. When we want to survive, we want the entire communities to survive. That has been not just the hospitality, not just the morality that we have, but it has always been how the community has been able to survive. We would not be able to survive this long if it had not been for this collectivist ideals. And so when it comes to these small tidbits and small glimpses of the culture, I did not understand how collective we were until this story, and until trying to brainstorm with my mother and find out, this was how she actually was brought up, and how the community would not only leave the furnitures or the belongings or containers to be made within the family, but they let it be a community thing, and they go on to help other families to do the same every few months. And this is such an integral part of the community. And so the book is tying those traditions to folklore. And I really, really hope that whoever have the capacity to buy the book and read them will enjoy some of this glimpses that I'm trying to shed onto what has made the community so strong, so resilient, and what really is truly our identity as a people. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin. I'm so excited to read this book, and I love that you have a white elephant, a strong symbol of strength as well, featured in the book, and the illustrations look incredible. And I am really glad that you mentioned kissa and just the idea of storytelling in sort of a communal space. I mean, the reason why this is so important, this book and this act of you, Yasmin, wanting to do this, wanting to take the time out to do this and do this for your community, but also beyond your community. So it's sharing strength with other refugee communities who are sitting in refuge and who are probably waiting for decisions made for them, about them, without them being involved. And so we don't know how many times these kissas are being told right now in the camps, as some sense of hope and some sense of, tomorrow is still, a day to live for within the camps. So, thank you so much for working on this. And we will be very, very privileged to be able to hold a copy soon and to be able to read through it and share it within our own communities in the diaspora as well. what's really interesting.
Rahima, if it's okay, I just forgot one point that I wanted to add.
Of course.
I think it's also important that when I look back in my own childhood, it has never been one with, representation. And of course, we have a lot of these discussions of like, oh, people of color, BIPOC community, not having enough representation in the, larger scheme of things in the global community, in the spaces that decisions are made and power power and resources are allocated. So when it comes to this book, I think it was more to heal my inner child as well. But at the same time, I want this to be a love letter from myself to young children in the camps. And that was the initial promise that the publishing company and Asia Foundation was going to make these books available in the camps. I hope those children actually get to see themselves represented and their culture, and that they wouldn't have to grow up like myself, hating on the identity that we hold, and really understand and enjoy the sense of community that we have, and take such pride in it. In a way that probably wasn't possible before. And really, I think that pride, that sense of collectivism pride, will take them very, very far in their negotiation for agency, for them to be able to exercise their autonomy and create spaces for their own community and negotiate what they need, what they want, and implement it. Thank you.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. It comes with a sort of an unshakable conviction in your identity and the reason why you should continue to preserve that identity. I couldn't agree more, Yasmin. And I think that's why it leads me quite nicely into this discussion of, during the pandemic, we know across a lot of refugee camps in the world, we had limited resources. Everything was changing. We all kind of, I guess, froze for that couple of years. But one of the most distinct things, and I particularly, especially working within this field, in both doing advocacy work for the Rohingya community and also providing humanitarian aid, what we noticed were restrictions, red tape everywhere, essential services only. And I understand that the COVID pandemic meant that you had to curb the widespread of the virus within the camps, these spaces where you had 1 million plus congested, refugee camps. You had to do whatever you can. But limiting things down just to the essential services also means schools were closed. I run 2 schools inside the refugee camps. The children had nowhere to go. They were not just schools. They were also safe spaces. The children would just hang out. They would just talk. They would meet their friends. It would be a moment of escape from their day-to-day struggle and day-to-day suffering and day-to-day lacking as well, the 1 meal a day, waiting for the next round of aid. The schools were closed. A lot of the women's centers were closed and eventually closed for almost 6 to 7 months completely. What do you both think? And I'll start with you, Max, on this. In terms of these essential services, do you think we need a change? Do you think they need to be revised? And if you do, why? And what do you think we should head towards? And what kind of essential services, so to speak, should we really try and cultivate going forward within the refugee camp in Bangladesh?
Thank you, Rahima, for that question. By the way, Yasmin, a huge congratulations and mabruk on the book. It looks absolutely phenomenal. I'd love to get a chance to check it out. I'll answer that question, Rahima, in a really honest way, if I can be, is that it was really hard. It was really, really hard to try to run programs in the camps during COVID, and it still has not completely gotten out of it yet. For us, we had an art center. We're running programs year round, the first art center in the history of the Rohingya camp, and it got shut down because of COVID, and it still has not been opened up since, and which has been extremely challenging. And so, we had to find alternatives. We had to find really realistic, difficult alternatives on a short-term basis. And so we did some really interesting programs about saying, okay, well, if kids aren't in schools, and we all know how controversial it is kids even going to school in Bangladesh, especially Rohingya children, that is in itself something that is a big conversation, let alone higher education. And, I think advocacy that you and Yasmin are doing, Rahima, are so important. Like, it's so important, because I look at these at our artists, and I'm just thinking, God, if you happen to have been born in a different place or happen to have had other opportunities, you would have achieved the world, like everything in the world. And that you happen to be in a camp that now has 85% that is boxed in, that they're not allowed to leave, and having many people who are being sent to Bhasanchar, and which is the island off the coast of Bangladesh, and that there's many challenges. This is not an easy time. And so we have to figure out, okay, what can we do? People can't move freely, they can't gather in groups. Our entire foundation of what we do is bringing people together to be able to make public art together. So the whole foundation of what we created was in question. And so we were able to create some pretty interesting programs that were in response. I'll just share a couple of examples. One was, we had the opportunity to have our artists working just with the people right around their area, just with their families and the people they were living with, to be able to start to collect stories about what matters the most to them. And then they ended up actually working with local imams, and were able to work with some of the local focus groups with women who were on the street, and especially people who had just recently arrived, and actually create a series of canvas murals from the safety of their own homes, all about public health or really important issues in their communities. And then we actually ended up gluing them up to walls. And so we ended up having all these murals that we created. It was with UNICEF that then we were able to put up, that were created in the safety of their homes. And so we had over a dozen pieces that were created, which was a really interesting response. There was another response that we created where it was actually working, being able to do focus groups for asking what matters most for learning to play. And what was so interesting is they were able to create 283 different illustrations that were all about how to bring what would normally be in the informal learning centers and be able to actually bring it into the home. And so they had all these illustrations, and then ended up actually having instructions for caregivers who are largely do not have literacy in their backgrounds, to be able to say, okay, these are ways that we can do counting at home. These are ways that we can pretend to be a bird at home. Things of trying to say early childhood, especially that age of kind of 3 to 8, how can we bring learning into the home? I think that's really essential as well. And we did a whole range of digital training programs for artists to learn different skills and different types of design and education. But to answer your question, what are we going to do in this era? I think there's a couple of answers. One, there has to be a very strong advocacy block for children to have the right to learn no matter what. That is so important. And especially that advocacy needs to be coming from within the Rohingya community, and it also needs to come from the Bangladeshi community to their own government. We were lucky enough to work really hard with UNHCR, who I deeply respect, to be able to actually get a group of Rohingya children out of the refugee camp into the local host community Bangladeshi school, to be able to learn together, to be able to create a mural, and to be able to create a series of programs. And also we're able to work to paint a giant school bus in Ukiah Secondary School and in Kutupalong Primary School. And it was really an amazing program. But then as COVID happened, it kind of gave a reason to even lock down even more. And so I think that there needs to be advocacy coming. And especially if I look at you, Rahima and Yasmin, I mean, there's nobody stronger than you to be able to advocate, because I feel that you can be a bridge, right? Can be these bridge builders between the different worlds that need to be advocated for, like the government of Canada or the government of the UK, to say, we need to find ways to be able to put pressure to make sure children always have a right to learn no matter what. And I think that's really, really important. I think keeping language is really important as well. I think that's essential. And I think also, if I look at like the Tarana traditions of music, like for us, we have some incredible musicians that work with us named Bashir Ullah and Nobi Hussein. And what's been amazing, Bashir Ullah had this unbelievable story. And I think this is a testament to what we're talking about, where he unfortunately had a horrible experience of being tortured, and amazing was able to get out, and still has severe back pain and a lot of ongoing pain. And he said, and he went to the doctor and said, well, what am I going to do? Like, I don't feel okay, and I have my family to provide for. And he said, you need to find ways to make yourself happy. That's what matters the most. And what was so interesting is he has this quote, and I can actually find it in between our next conversation, where he said, music and art is my medicine. That is what keeps me feeling alive. And if I think about that, for him, he's able to share his experiences then with children. And if he can share it with children, keeping the cultural education alive. And even if there's limitations, which really strongly exist, saying, there are really important ways to make sure that education can flourish, because you can't have an entire population, an entire generation not being able to be educated. And so I think moving forward, when we look at what COVID, to answer your question, when we look at what COVID has done, I think it put a lot of barriers to being able to learn. And I think for those of us who are not in the camp and who have access, like the three of us, how do we advocate in the ways that we can to take people like Dildar and make sure she has the opportunity to support her community in the camp? And I think that's something that both of you have done in such an incredible way, and we're trying to do every day as well. But I think it's now more important than maybe ever before. So I think it's a really important question, Rahima.
Thank you, Max. And it's interesting that you mentioned the access to education as well. I have to echo this. I mean, we take it for granted, we receive food packs inside the refugee camps, we'll receive access to possibly some safe water or a place to shower in the morning. But then when the children, a whole generation of children, I mean, it was 60% plus of women and children inside the camps alone, and that's just in Bangladesh. And then we have the Rohingya diaspora who are struggling in Malaysia and other parts of the world, just trying to find their feet and finding some sense of support. It's a whole skipped generation of children that won't be able to fulfill their absolute potential and be able to just have a childhood and play and create. And that in itself, it's a grim future. It's an absolute grim future that I think nations across the world should be ashamed of if we don't contribute to try and support in some way. So I'm really, really glad that you touched on that note. Yasmin, what are your thoughts in terms of the essential services and how we need to rethink them? And what do you think they should look like going forward? And I'm sure the three of us will agree in terms of what our vision is for this, but I'd really like to hear this. And especially as you've just finished writing a book as well, and you're working on something that works on creative agency itself. What do you think?
I think just to briefly put it, I think art and creative literature or creativity in general are instruments to exercise one agency, right? Without being political, without actually, stepping on anyone's toe. It's just an expression and a way to process our own experiences. And a lot of times they're very, very powerful, not just to, not even to share with the world, not even to tell people what happened, but more so for us to be able to understand our inner self and really be able to process them and set them aside almost, and say to ourselves that it has ended. We're okay now, we're safe. And even though we're faced with a lot of these limitations, we can find ways to move forward. But unfortunately for the Rohingya refugees and many in the diaspora across the region, that survival hasn't ended yet. There's constant risk of bad actors complicating their lives, and if food and water are still a question, how could you actually thrive, right? And so my hope and my push for advocacy, as Max has put it really, really well, obviously I'm going to continue to ask and push for the necessities to be met. But at the same time, I'm going to inquire the international community, who again, and this is without pointing fingers, but I think it needs to be spelled out. It was not Rohingya's fault that we're here today. It was the collective irresponsibility, collective failure to meet and to address the issues that are, really, a lot of them were early warning signs, but we failed to actually act in time to protect these populations. Therefore, when it comes to helping Rohingya, if it's going to make it, if we're going to look at its sustainability, look at the Rohingya community for answers. And Max already put it in initially. There was this one time where I think maybe in 2018, where a lot of Rohingya advocates and civil society groups were being clamped down. They were picked up by special branch police. There were a lot of issues around commemorating the Genocide Day on August 25th. And what my people had done, what a lot of young people had done was, this is going to show how creative they are, basically they strung up these masks. And I probably can share this. It's part of my PowerPoint, but basically they strung up these masks. It was during the pandemic. So they strung up this mask and basically expressed their frustration of not being involved, of being kept outside of these decision-making processes. And they were saying, no consultation, there will be no solution. Let me just show you the picture really quickly before I end this. This is what happened. Because they can't really be there in person, they will be arrested, they'll face repercussion. And this is what they had done. Imagine if we actually allow them into the table and allow them to express themselves, allow them to actually help us make decisions in the international community. How much of these creative solutions will we find, right? And we are just, we undermine people through these struggle narratives, as you've mentioned, Rahima, that we almost think that they don't have the ability to provide solutions for themselves. But we have been a community who've survived on our own for a very long time with little help from outside and access to the outside world. So maybe it's time for the international community to really shift their lens and shift their focus from just aid from top down, but really empower people from bottom up. If you really think that you're going to help meet the necessity and help us be able to eat, provide food, provide water, maybe go on to support those grassroots organizations themselves. Pay the people in the camps to create those conditions. Pay them to actually create camps economy. And I assure you, they will keep it going, because that's who we have been all along. And so leaving this, of course, I'm going to continue my advocacy through this lens, holistic lens, and ensure that, accountability is not just, phrased or become confined in this mechanism and mechanical language, but really a holistic, encompassing and really compassionate view of how we can help a community to become more self-reliant on themselves and really no longer need our help in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yasmin, and thank you, Max. It's interesting that you covered so many thoughts that I often have on my mind about what that self-determination looks like and sounds like and feels like. I mean, look, my fellow British engineers would spend about a year trying to get the first drawings of a bridge done, and my friends in the Rohingya camps have built that bamboo bridge within a month. And so I think that's kind of speak to the community, be consultative. The community has the solutions, it has the plan, it just needs us to stand in solidarity and kind of I guess in some ways to shadow those plans. And I've always felt this, and I'm really glad that you also touched on how art is such a tool of resistance through and through. I remember 15 years ago when we started speaking about the Rohingya community in London, no one was interested. No one wanted to, everyone was like, Rohingya, who, where, which part of the world? And it was interesting for us because we saw this as a challenge, as with many communities, to not only break down who the community were, where they were, what they were doing before this crisis, and what this crisis has done, the undoing. We started to hold film screenings and music gigs, just simple music gigs. We wouldn't tell anyone this had anything to do with human rights. People would come down to see their favorite band or a new emerging band, or they'd come down to support their friend, or there's an art event or an exhibition, and they would come down for this. And at the end of each event, we would make everyone stand there for 20 minutes to listen to us. We would shut the door and we would say, guys, we brought you here for this. And we would speak about the Rohingya community, and we would speak about their struggle and how they ended up slowly over the last 22 years finding refuge in Bangladesh, and refuge that wasn't comfortable. It was ugly. It wasn't welcomed. And speaking about sort of those layers of struggle, And it took those film screenings and music nights and exhibitions to be able to get people to listen in 15 years ago. And we started the work that we did at Restless Beings. And so, you know, I really couldn't resonate enough with both of the work that you're doing. And I'm really glad that this conversation is, I feel, the beginning of so many conversations to come about how we can work towards changing the narrative and changing the ways in which we support, you know, both NGOs, INGOs across the world, and in terms of how the government actually looks at the Rohingya community and rethinks how they want to provide that support as well. So thank you both for allowing me to be here to listen to you both and to get an insight into not only just your work, but also what your vision and hope is for the future. I've had a look to see if we've got any questions from our listeners, and I'll just double check one more time. I saw a comment earlier on. So we don't have any questions, but what we do have is love and respect to Yasmin and Max from Christine Fries. We also have someone, Diane Kusud saying an amazing panel and discussion. I'm very grateful for this. We also had someone saying that they were really enjoying it and keep it up. So I feel that I should share those. We don't have any questions, and maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's because everything that we're saying, everyone is like, yep, let's go. Let's try and change things going forward in terms of our support. I'd like to hand over to Lauren now as we bring this conversation to an end. Thank you both again. Lauren.
Thank you, Rahima, and thank you, Yasmin and Max. It's just been an honor to listen to the three of you. And I hope this is the first of many of these conversations that we can be having, because I wholeheartedly agree that the Rohingya must be centered in all of these conversations, should always be and need to be going forward. And so it's just been incredible to hear what all of you have to say. So thank you to all of you for speaking, to everyone that's been listening. We do have another event in this series that's coming up next Thursday. It's called The Tools of Survival, Tribal Education, Relationships, and Sovereignty in Oregon. It's a conversation with EcoTrust's Lisa Watt and the Oregon Department of Education's Brent Spencer. So hope people can join next Thursday at noon for that. There's another partner event tomorrow at noon Pacific time, Interrupting Violence from the Holocaust to Modern Hate Groups. And you can register for both of those on the Oregon Jewish Museum and Center for Holocaust Education's website. And then if you missed last week's event, that's recorded, and you can find that on Oregon Jewish Museum's website or YouTube, and as well as the Never Again Coalition's. And this will be up, the recording of this event, because I would like to watch it over and over again, will be up in the next 24 hours. So I want to thank all of you for speaking. It's just been amazing to hear from you, and I hope everyone has a good rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was an incredible panel. Yasmin and Rahima, I really look forward to connecting with you, and I want you to connect with our teams around the world. I think it's so important, and for you to hopefully one day come and make some art with our team, I think it would be remarkable. So thank you so much for the conversation. It was just deeply meaningful to me and the whole Artolution team from around the world. So shukriya. Thank you so much.
Shukriya.
Thank you.
Thank you, Max.
Shukriya. It was an honor. We need to all paint together and
Absolutely.
rethink this resistance.
And Rahima is such a great artist. She hasn't told you guys yet, but he has so many great work. We barely touched on it. So we'll have to have more conversation around this. Thank you so much. Really such an honor. Take care.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
So
take care.
Bye.